Hello and welcome to Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I'm super excited to have a friend of mine who I met in Mexico last spring, Theresa Beran Kulat. Theresa, or Teri, as her friends call her. Did I pronounce your name right? Yeah,
Close enough.
close enough.
Baron Kulat.
Beran Kulat, fantastic. So those of you who aren't familiar with Teresa's work, or as she likes to be called, Teri, my guest today was raised Catholic with a strong mystical side, gave her first astrology lecture in eighth grade, and has been studying, doing readings, and teaching ever since. A student of many religious traditions with an undergraduate degree in economics and a law degree, she lives and works in the suburbs of Chicago. Professionally, she goes by Theresa Beran Kulat. I know her as Teri, which is how she is known to her friends and family. And like I mentioned before, we met in Mexico at an ISTA retreat, ISTA, exploring deep spiritual, sexual, and shamanic practices. It was awesome, by the way, 50 and over, which was fantastic. She has a mastery level training with the TantraNova Institute and quantum healing training in the Rowley Method. She is a member of Integral Life and uses Ken Wilber's framework as a context for her work. For over 20 years, she has been applying these different modalities to help families heal through her work as a divorce mediator and a collaborative lawyer. Teri enjoys guiding people in the creation of satisfying relationships. If people are divorcing, they can do it with love, respect, and dignity. Trinity Family Law is her firm, trinityfamilylaw.com, if you're interested. Her signature offering, called Intentional Relationship Design, has helped struggling couples create a new marriage to live into and has guided not yet married couples into a framework to consciously create their partnership. She provides individual and couples coaching with astrology and other spiritual practices mixed in, and is sought after trainer and speaker. You can learn about her programs and upcoming events at tbkulat.com. Teri, welcome to the show. Love your bio.
So good to be here, Liz.
So happy that you're here. I know that I just read this beautiful bio, but can you please share with our audience what led you really to doing this work that you do today?
Of course, as I've been listening to your podcast, and everyone has sort of a circuitous route that we get here. My current work is really to integrate spirituality into modern and postmodern family life. And so really the path was sort of my spiritual path, Catholicism, astrology, energy work. And then my legal work, the going to law school and supporting families in the court system and going through a very difficult time, such that I'm holding both the masculine and the feminine when I'm working with them, because it's a transition period. People's lives are falling apart. They want somebody strong to support them. And yet at the same time, they need to be held and allowed to fall apart. And so it's an interesting work that I do. And again, each couple that comes in has unique needs. And so some of them need more of my legal expertise. And so I'll be mediating. We have spreadsheets and projections and financial information. And then some people are just grieving. And so in that case, it's more like spiritual direction. And I'll give them books to read. I'll support them in just sharing and expressing emotions maybe they haven't even allowed themselves to feel. And as the bio said, my latest off, the really things that get me off right now is to help people create relationships. Sometimes it's from the ashes, right? Everything's burned to the ground, and now what can we create from that new space? So, um, yeah, the fun story, I think you said, how did it get started?
Mhm.
The cute story is when I was in eighth grade, everybody had to give a speech. And so the teacher assigned everybody a speech, and they had to talk for 5 minutes. I went home, and there was this huge coffee table book at my mom's house and my parents' house, and I read it and I figured it all out, and I wrote up the history of astrology and I made handouts for everybody. And I talked about the modalities and the elements. And I started talking. The bell rang. I probably went 20, 30 minutes because everybody else was like, oh God, don't make me talk. And I'm just like, da 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 da. So that was kind of the kickoff of my metaphysical journey.
God, I love that so much. It's funny. I
Yeah.
just started taking a class. It's mixing astrology with mediumship, and it's really like learning another language. So for you to like read through a table book and stand up as a child and go into everything for way longer than 5 minutes is impressive.
Well, you just made a really good point. So the next, I've had a couple interesting stops on my journey. Um, Hold on one second. I'm going to take a sip of water. You might have to edit this out.
We're just fine. I like that live
Um,
aspect of my show. It's real, right?
um,
Real time, real life.
so you said mediumship. So the next kind of key activity or moment in my journey was I'm a theater person. I'm a singer. Ave Maria, the Schubert version, is one of my signature songs, and I basically just really connected with Mother Mary during that song, right?
Wow.
Well, when I was in high school, the lead, I was the lead in the Sound of Music. And my rehearsals, my practicing, I would go to the hills by my house and sing out to the hills and pretend I was her and like basically channel this woman because the story is very much grounded in love, right?
Hmm.
And the the last night of the last performance, our theater sat 1,000 people. It was a all girl Catholic school, so we had 200 girls in the choir, and then your people. And I came down the stairs for the final bow. And as the lead, you take the last bow and then you hold the hands of everybody, and then everybody bows together. Okay. In that moment, when I held the hands, it was, I became one with everyone in the crowd, in the cast, the whole audience, all of Chicago, the planet, the universe. It was samadhi. Basically, in an instant, I was one with, and like even criminals, even war, even like things that are bad and dark were included and part of the love. And then boom, I was right back in my body.
Wow.
So I say that's part of like what keeps me going is spiritual experiences. Like we can talk about all the bumps in the road and the difficulties, but never have I ever doubted that there is a oneness and an order to life in the universe, and I do have a part in it. So that was another thing I wanted to kind of share because that was really a significant part of my journey.
Wow, what an incredible moment for you. And to feel the oneness, had you been able to at that time to continue holding that feeling? Do you hold it to this day? Are you able to like go back to it? And do you, a two-part question, and do you or are you able to pull it up again? Are you able to go back to that feeling again?
Well, now we can talk because really that's the orgasmic union. And if I were to answer honestly, my times of being in touch with that energy and that awareness have been in orgasm with a partner and alone, frankly. I mean, I think it, that's when as a divorce lawyer, and I've done a lot of Tantra training, and I try to explain to people, I mean, you're really searching for that union again. And being with another and vulnerable and tapping into it, it's very powerful. Um, when I was 17, no, it didn't happen very much after that. It was kind of a one and done, but it was that glimpse, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Wow, that's wild too. And it really is. I've experienced the oneness, and there is this other layer with the oneness I have felt in sacred union. There's a
Yeah.
story that I've shared before on the podcast where my lover and I had completed our lovemaking, and in the orgasmic waves, I'm visualizing us in this spiral that's going up. And then we meet at the top with this burst of light between us. And it's just beautiful, just tears of joy and love, just like feeling just the overwhelming experience of love in that light, in that union. And it's almost indescribable, really.
You really can't put words on it. You can't. It's way beyond words. And it is love. You know, love has all sorts of different flavors and textures. Um, and I'm not saying that the love between a man and a woman or two partners is better than any other, but it does have the unique quality of really total surrender. And I think in that surrender is how the union can actually be allowed. Because really, we can access it at any time,
Mhm.
but it's hard, right?
Yeah, I like that you brought up
So,
surrender too, because it really is surrendering to the feelings and the emotions of what's going on, the energy of what's going on, instead of being thinking, okay, what's going on with my body? What's going on with their body? Are they okay? Am I okay? Like kind of getting the head out of the way and just focusing on the emotion and the feeling and the energy of what's going on in the moment. I think that's really important to point out.
but you know, I wasn't, we didn't really talk about how this was going to go, but it connects for me two pieces I'd like to share with you.
Please.
Um, One is having done a lot of work in the Tantra space, right? And the importance of healing the wounds and feeling the pain. And I won't go into too much detail, but there is a degree of wounding that we all have, and we need to experience it, feel it, let it move through us in order to get beyond that to the place that you're referring to,
Hmm.
right? To the place where, you know, I was holding hands after having just experienced and provided and contributed and surrendered to life to perform through me. And but if we're hurting or angry or fearful, we're not going to feel that because that's the separation. But we need to get through it. And the story, okay, so now this is something we I glimpsed at about because when we first met, I wanted to share this with you, but it's like way too big. And I thought, ooh, I'm going to explain it now.
Perfect.
So when I was in my 20s, I was raised Catholic, which is very patriarchal, right? But I'm like, there's got to be the divine feminine. There's got to be the feminine face of God. You know, clearly these men just rewrote everything, and I won't go down that road. But I was genuinely yearning. And I was working with a spiritual director at the time, and I remember I was driving in my car, and I'm like, I want to see the feminine face of God. Get all these men everywhere. And I looked up in my rearview mirror, and my eye, the reflection of my eye was in the rearview mirror. And it was so clear. It's like, that is the face of the feminine.
Wow.
It's you, it's your human experience. And the Bhairava Tantra, the Radiant Sutras, it's really about the path to the divine is through the embodied, through the divine feminine.
Yes.
So that was like one thing. And then the other one, because it kind of transfer translates over to what we were going to talk about, is I had an experience that same summer, and I had a cassette player with the meditation on it, and I went to this. I lived in Minnesota, and I was in sales, so I was at this national park out in the middle of nowhere. So I'm laying in the grass, and I put on this tape of this guided meditation. It's like, okay, you know, relax, and then meet your spirit animal and follow the animal to your spirit guide. So I'm laying there and doing this little inner journey, and it was a little house. And I walked up the stairs of the house, and I walked through the door, and there was a woman sitting in a rocking chair. And I climbed up into her lap, and I wept.
Wow.
Oh my God, Liz, I cried and I cried. I could have been 30 minutes, could have been an hour. I just know never had I allowed myself to feel the pain that I was feeling in that moment and just be held by someone who, even though it was not real, it was energetic, just to be able to feel and move through that sadness and that pain and that grief. And then it's at a certain point, energetically, I turned into the mother holding the child. And then that continued for a while. And then, so I share that because my own relationship with my mother was not like that at all. Right. And so to experience that energetically, that's another one of those experiences that really has shaped me as a human. That it's okay to feel pain. You have to get through that to get to the other side. And then on the other side, that energy of her is now integrated in me. And I really believe that sometimes people hire me because they just need to be held.
Hmm.
And I have no problem. I will tell you, a lot of men are my clients and they can express whatever they want and I don't flinch. And I think that's one of the challenges of that men face, right? Because they also have the divine feminine within them. And yet our culture doesn't really provide space for them to feel emotions. And
Right.
so I don't know. I just thought I wanted to share that because it connects to what we did in Mexico,
And I feel
right?
like too, like you're bringing through the divine feminine, but you're also holding that divine masculine space and you're holding a space of non-judgment, which would allow them to be authentic, to be themselves, to bring themselves to you in a way that would further assist them because they're open. You allow them to be open to
Yep.
receive, right? And I think that everything that we experience contributes to what we end up doing in life. And of course, those experiences that you had early on in life would contribute to the work that you're doing today, of course. And I could tell your energy is amazing. You have a warmth about you. You're definitely holding the divine feminine. You hold joy. You hold bliss. Of course, you would be able to hold your clients in a way where they would be able to be open with you. So let's
Yeah.
dive a little bit deeper, Teri, because we want to talk about parts work today and what you were just talking about, diving in to get through. Let's talk about that wounding, that parts work. What is parts work?
Oh, great question. And it's funny because as a young person, remember 13 in my 20s, in astrology, it's a recognition that there's a chart and each person has a sun, a moon, a Venus, a Mercury. And it's funny, I correct people all the time. They say, "Well, I'm a Taurus or I'm a Cancer." I was like, "No, you are not just a Taurus. You are not just a Cancer. The sun was in Cancer when you were born." And so you have other parts. And what happens, and I'm playing astrologer now, right? Like we have all these different parts within us, and different people will have them in different locations, right? And the trouble that people get into, so it's funny because I've been coaching since I was 20 because I would coach people by means of their chart, right? And so when people have a struggle or a challenge, it's usually because a part of themselves is not getting a voice. They aren't being seen, they're not being heard. And so I can kind of tell based on the chart or the transit, which part of them is getting repressed. Okay. And the connection to the divorce work, because I think, that's what all my hats kind of come together. But when a person marries another person, it's really like a part of them and that the other person is mirroring them. And so we have to somewhat create divisions of labor Okay. The caregiver, the breadwinner. But that doesn't mean those are not in you. And in divorce, often people then the other person has lost that shine. So now they're projecting onto that person the troubles or I mean, I'll give you my own example. I used to say, well, he doesn't love me, because I'm too fat or I'm too whatever. It's like that was not him. That was me, right? Projecting and putting on him things that were already inside of me. So I see a lot of couples, and that's partly how I help coach them to get through their divorce, is really to see the other person with compassion, and it is a part of you. And anyway, so that's sort of, did I do a fairly, it's parts work is a whole thing in therapy, in therapeutic circles.
Hmm.
And psychodrama, um so this is like a treatment methodology. And astrology, you can actually get people together, and let's say there's 10 people in the group and one person gets a turn, and piece of the group pretends and acts out the sun and the moon and the Venus and the Saturn is the father, right? So Saturn energy, wherever that shows up in your chart, is what your father was like.
Hmm.
And so I'm just kind of moving it into the therapy circles now. Let's just say this too. Carl Jung was an astrologer. He like did a chart for every person who became his client. So these things are related, although some people don't recognize that.
Hmm.
Um, but that's what parts work is. Even like inner child work. Um, I mean, that's very common, and people understand that. So again, I'll speak from experience, or my personal experience. This is a funny story. So I was dating this guy, and we lived fairly far away from each other. And so we would talk on the phone, and we would make plans. It's like, okay, we're going to talk on Tuesday night. Well, it was a Monday morning, and he sent me a text and said, I can't talk. Oh, can we talk tonight instead of tomorrow? I immediately like went into this panic, and the fight or flight came up. It's like all he did was say, can we talk tonight instead of tomorrow? And so I say that because what I did then was I went inside. It's
Hmm.
like, okay, where do you feel this? What does this feel like? How old were you when you first felt like this? Okay. And so that's parts work, is
Okay.
going to the place inside of you that is another part of you that needs attention.
It kind of reminds me of this other modality. I was just trying to look it up because what you described was, okay, we're sitting in a circle, everybody is being a part of the astrological chart. And it sounds really familiar to this one um, modality where you go into a situation like me and my mom, we had this problem, blah, 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 blah. And now I am having this uh new diagnosis. I'm just gonna throw something out there. So you go in like, okay, let's try to figure out what this new diagnosis is. And then you have people around you and they play different parts in your life. Like one will play the diagnosis, one will play you, one will play your mother, one will play out, be the situation that was in the past to point to what was the initial cause of the onset of whatever the diagnosis may be. Does that make
Wow,
sense? Yeah.
that's wild. Well, in TantraNova, which is where I got much of my training,
Hmm.
one point in time, there was a theater training where you would, and I did it. I went back to with the group, breaking up with my high school boyfriend. And because it was still stuck in me, and I still
Right.
was making stuff up about it. So this other guy in the class played his part, and we acted out, and it's was, taken a different turn. What if he said this? What if you said that? And just making things more malleable by and aspecting. I mean, I think we
Yeah,
can
it's
talk about
aspecting. Yeah.
aspecting at ISTA, right?
Yeah. And aspecting is where, for those of you who don't know out there, is where you take your mom and you sit her across from you, her energetic mom across the mat from you, and you have a conversation. What would she say to you? And then you can switch places. You can be the mom and have her be the receiver and, play what would she say through you. It's a very energetic experience. And it's amazing. I recommend it to my clients when they have a situation that they need to work out or the person's not in their life anymore, whether they be passed on or just not in their life anymore. Sit with their higher self, talk to them, work it out. Like what would you say to them? What would you want to hear from them? Yeah, I agree.
And it allows you to tap into, for example, the archetype of the mother,
Hmm.
right? Like my mother was one embodiment of the mother archetype. There's different types of mothers, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that's kind of all this parts work is sort of interrelated.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I like how it breaks it down into different pieces because we store these things in our body. I
Yep.
work on people all the time, and I can be working on someone and their mom pops in, or their brother pops in, or an injury that they had, or a past life, even to work on it because it's living in the body, it's living in the energetic field. And we
Yep.
need to bring it up and out to be able to release it all because it's in the releasing that we move forward, that we're able to set the past in the past where it belongs, healed, hopefully, and move on.
Well, and that relates to, I think in my bio, I said I've studied several different healing modalities.
Mhm.
And the idea of, I'm an empath, I'm all the clairs, right? And I I have an energetic hygiene team that I have to go to on a regular basis because I can do my own brushing of my teeth and clearing out my field, but every once in a while I need like an expert to go in there. One guy said it's like cleaning barnacles off a ship. He's like, "Teresa, you take on too much of these people's stuff. I gotta clean all these barnacles." But I bring it up because one of the principles is that Theresa Beran Kulat, cannot process someone else's pain. And so they might give it to me and I might hold it for a bit, but I have to give it back to them because it cannot be transmuted in my field.
Mhm.
And so I just share that because that's another, you could arguably say that's parts work, right? They put something
Mhm.
on me because they can't handle it right now, but I have to give it back. I can't hold on to it. It's got to go back to the light that they are because even these painful experiences, they do make us who we are and we grow through that.
Yeah, we would not be who we are today without our past experiences. And I think what you're speaking to just then was recapitulation, which is okay, I'm going to give back what does not belong to me, and I am going to call my energy back to myself.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, and I remembered what the name was of the other thing that's similar to parts work, constellations,
Oh
family
yeah.
constellations.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
Also,
in Chicago and we have a very family therapy group here. It's really well known around the country, and they do constellation work. The other thing this conversation is making me think of
mhm.
does connect to our time in Mexico, um, is the Sacred Heart, right, and the wounding, and the fact that if you are wounded, that's the place where the light gets out, right? Like we avoid pain, but really the pain is an important part of our journey.
Mhm.
And like I said, in that oneness experience in samadhi, there really was no bad. There was nothing that wasn't included. Um, so again, it's hard as humans to actually figure out like why. And at this level, it's pretty hard to know the answer to that. When we get into higher levels of consciousness, oh, we can see how these things are connected. Um, and you bring up, past lives and present lives and, energy being sent through DNA and So it's,
I'm glad that you spoke
I
to that
laugh
too.
because,
I'm glad that you spoke to
go
that
ahead.
of your samadhi, that really what you saw was there's no good and no bad. And I've heard other people speak to that as well, that when they have these experiences, they see that it served a purpose. Now, our rational minds, our human minds might be like, no, that's not okay. Like this, that, and the other should not be happening whatsoever. But that's us here in this incarnation in our human selves, not knowing what the big picture is and what role that actually plays. And I know I might even catch hell for this because there's a lot of terrible things that happen to really good people. And, there are things that I've seen in my own life from, even from a young child, like, why does this happen? Why is this bad person doing these bad things? Or when I'm older, like, that's not okay to do to someone, or this isn't okay to do to a child, or that's not okay. So a lot of these things are really hard to mentally like grasp, especially if they've happened to you, that it served a purpose. Like it's really hard to grasp. But I have heard it before that in the big picture and that in samadhi, people do see that everything does serve a purpose and there's no emotional attachment also to any of that. And when people cross over and have near death experiences, there's also on the other side no emotional attachment to any specific harm that someone does to another.
Well, this connects me to a couple, I'm going to say almost kind of humorous things that I have used for my own growth and development. And that is when, so first of all, I completely loved my husband. I still love him. We had two children. We made a wonderful life together. And there reached a point where we needed to get divorced because, on the human level, we were not relating very well. But I remember even in that time period, I'm like, well, what if he is such an advanced spiritual being that he has come to be all the things that totally irritate me so that I can grow through this situation by loving him exactly as he is, even though he irritates the hell out of me.
That's very eighth
And
dimensional
I've
of you,
shared that
Teri.
with people because a lot of times, say that again.
That's very eighth dimensional of you, Teri. That acceptance is living in that eighth dimension. And how people are talking about 5D this, 5D that, blah, 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 blah. But I see what's really happening is that coming into the eighth dimension, which is acceptance of everything. And then you were able to find a point, as humorous as it may seem, like maybe he's here to teach me acceptance. Like that's unconditional love, accepting you as you truly are. I might have to create boundaries, so, I'm not impacted by your behavior, but I accept you fully for who you are. And thank you for being my teacher, right?
Exactly. It even goes beyond to gratitude, right?
Yeah.
Like, not only do I accept you, I'm like, thank you for helping me grow. Because it's really easy to love people who are nice to you, who treat you well, who do exactly what you think they should be doing. It's harder to love people who aren't, who are challenging you or who aren't behaving the way you think they should. So,
Yeah.
and the other thing I'll relate to my work because it, as an attorney, um, there are laws and rules, and family law is what they call equitable. In other words, it's not really black and white. It's what's fair, what's reasonable, what's going to be working for this family, what's in the best interest of the children. And I always say there's boundaries and your range. Like for example, people think, oh well, property's split 50-50. Okay, yeah, that's a rule of thumb. It could be 60-40. It could be. I go, but sometimes people want to do things that are beyond the what is needed and expected. And like they might want to give 70% to the other party. Like, and I'm saying generosity and giving, not I'm going to make somebody pay to give me that, right?
Mhm.
That I don't work with those people. But I do work with people who say, "Yeah, I want my spouse to be okay. I'm going to give them more than I really have to." And I would say, "Hey, maybe that's some past life karmic debt that they're wanting to, square away today and not have it keep repeating. So that's where I think a spiritual perspective on sort of the work that I do is helpful, right? Because it does give you a bigger lens to look at, what's going on.
I love that. Teri, can you share an example of parts work, maybe from a past client that you've worked with, and how you were able to help them via the parts work come to a amicable decision, I guess is a good way to put it. Like, could you give us an
Sure.
example of parts work in action? And so that way we can see
Yeah, I mean,
the benefit us.
well, I think it's hard in the divorce arena because both people are generally in a trauma state when they come in, right? So half of the work, and as a collaborative lawyer, which this is, if you listen to my other podcasts, a lot of times people ask me about this kind of work. We have therapists, actually, mental health professionals on our teams to help people deal with the social emotional aspects of it. So that's more their department in the legal work. In the coaching, so I'll put it in the coaching because um, in addition to representing clients in legal matters, I coach people whose whose spouses don't want to take the high road. So now they're stuck in the muck of litigation. And so in that realm, that's probably a better example. Um, when I have a client who's projecting onto their spouse or projecting onto the other attorney XYZ, like they're unfair, they're unreasonable. And so what I need to do with them is have them connect to the parts of themselves, like who really is feeling betrayed and where does that come from and how does that look familiar? And it's in that case, we're really doing like inner child work. And because they need to take care of themselves, they can't expect, it's often like the spouse is leaving and therefore what they thought was their support system is now going away. So now they have to reclaim the part of themselves that's going to take care of them, that's going to be the breadwinner. Whereas before the other spouse was maybe the breadwinner, and now they have to own that part of themselves that maybe got put on hold. That's kind of a common thing. I hate to say that.
Interesting. I like this
And that's the
framework, and I
Capricorn.
like, yeah, I like the wording of it too, because when you do go through a divorce, I went through a divorce 6 years ago, and you do come up on these things. It's like, okay, who am I if I'm not this, that, or the other, right? And then, okay, this is going away for me. So what does that look like for me to now again step into that role that I had maybe before marriage? Again, and later in life, obviously, after a 20-year marriage. So to give it that label, it's like, okay, it's not just, oh my gosh, I have to, go back to work. I've been taking care of kids for 18 years or whatever it may be. It's okay, I have to step back into my inner breadwinner. I like that because you're reframing it in a way so it's not this um I guess this thing that you could wound yourself with in the
Right.
moment or get caught up in a story about it in your mind about what's going on. And it takes you out of victim mentality. I like that.
Well, and you just used a great word, and that is story, because we're always making up stories about ourselves, about other people, about what's happening. And astrologically, when I do a chart, I'm very conscious of making sure everybody knows you have this, you have this, you have this, you have this. These are resources that maybe you haven't had to call upon in lately because somebody else was kind of filling that bucket for you. But you, in the center of the chart, in the center of who you are, you have access to, a woman has access to her inner masculine. And a man, you know, I, I've had a couple of situations where a couple is married and the woman leaves the husband for another woman. And it's very hard on a man when that happens. And so a lot of what I'm helping him deal with is, it's okay to feel hurt and angry and sad and all that stuff. Um, and to have him embrace his divine feminine,
Mm,
because there's a trend now. When I first started 20 years ago, it was your typical dads were there every other weekend and Wednesday night. Now dads are taking on like 50-50 parenting, like, and they have to learn because they haven't generally been taught how to be nurturing and how to be caring. So I try to explain to them, it's in there, you can do it. And so that's another example of the parts work that after the divorce, people do have to take on new roles, but they do have the resources within them to actually do it.
mhm. I
Yeah,
love that, you brought that up because what a gift to be able to work with someone like you instead of just fumbling through 6 years of, oh my gosh, now I have my kids 50% of the time. I was, usually all I had to think about was work. And now I have to be this full-time parent for 7 days every other week, And to have someone like you, Teri, who could sit with them and work with them instead of them fumbling through it, such a gift.
well, I think the more important distinction from the work that I do versus your traditional legal thing is I'll say we because collaborative practitioners, media, we encourage a couple to be partners, like,
Hmm.
and to stay in communication, not to cut each other off or, to still love the other person. I've been saying this for years. You can still love your spouse after you divorce them. Like, that's not part of the dominant paradigm, right?
Yeah.
But that's part of it, that they then can partner with each other and support each other, and we create the space that allows them to do that, as opposed to an adversarial system, which is not going to encourage that.
No, it
Yeah.
doesn't. And so often that's the case. And, I'm sure that there are people listening, that, don't have access to a partner who would be able to fill that space.
Right.
So to that partner, that's sitting there going, well, my partner is not available for that. What would you say to them?
Oh, this is a good one, because having at times felt like that person, and yet having done enough spiritual work, my inner partner is my own inner masculine, right? Like, as much as I want to rely on a partner, if they're not there or they're not capable or they're not willing, then I have to own that I am capable. And if I actually can't do the job myself, I am capable of requesting assistance and finding somebody who can support me in the way that I need to be supported. So I think that's really important, especially if there's children, right? We
Mhm.
could do a whole podcast, honestly, on the distinction between mating and marriage. There's a Dion Fortune is like one of my metaphysical teachers, and there's really great inner teachings about the difference. But the inner marriage is what will get you through anything.
Mm, nice. And I found on my journey that it was my inner marriage that's really gotten me through the 6 years.
Yep.
In addition to parallel parenting, which, has been my journey. I do want you to say a little bit about mating versus marriage because this is a conversation that we had in Mexico. And I think people hearing that distinction would be really beneficial, especially since you brought it up.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So clearly someone wanted me to share that.
Hmm.
Um, so the easy lowest level is, on a physical level, mating occurs between opposites. In other words, the masculine attracts the feminine, and it doesn't necessarily mean a man and a woman, right? We know that. But mating is biological, right? Like, you come together, there's an attraction. Uh, the union occurs and something new can be born. Sperm goes into the yoni. Yoni has an egg that receives the sperm, and then that life force energy unlocks the code inside those half things that come together and mate. Okay? You don't have to be married. Doesn't matter what age you are, but marriage is a social construct. It is a now some people would really talk about biblical construct and societal construct, but it is a man-made construct that really is designed and enforced by the state. So if a man and a woman declare that they want to be committed to each other, they stand up in front of the proper officiant who then registers their marriage with the local authorities or the state, whatever. But it's not going to stop the mating that might happen with somebody else. So, again, there's a whole level of and your listeners will know there's a physical body, emotional body, mental body, and then the spiritual causal body. And so between each of those layers, there's different mating that can occur. So in other words, intellectually on the in the mental field, you might have people that come together and mate on a mental level to create new ideas or new a business, for example, is like mating. Procter and Gamble got together, and now we see the fruits of all that mental work that they did to put in. I work for Procter and Gamble, for what it's worth, and the structures and the ideas that they put together that have stood the test of time, right? But it's different than marriage, right? Like just because they went to the state of Ohio and got a license to become a corporation, that did not mean that they were going to bear fruit. So that's an example of the distinction of mating versus marriage.
I love that. Thank you for that explanation. Teri, let's go back into parts work again. And for those listeners who are at home and they're like, okay, I'm struggling with this, thing in my relationship or this thing with my child or this thing at work, how can they bring parts work into their everyday life to try to figure out what's going on within themselves that they could have maybe a little practice at home to do?
Well, it's funny because I started thinking about children when you asked me about that, and then you asked this question. So I think parts work with children is really cool and helpful. So I'm going to go there.
Great.
Okay. Um, because I've also parented. I have two boys, they're 24 and 28. And the way you can use parts work with children is it's basically play therapy, right? So one of my kids was really into Legos, and so we'd have the policeman and the man who he pulled over, or the builder guy who's building the house, but then somebody comes over and knocks down the house. So what you can do is, like, if there's a breakdown between siblings or between you and a child, you can create a play scenario where they then go into these different parts and they can practice having these parts of the situation talk to each other, come up with different solutions, and basically create a new story. One of my basic, as a mediator, okay, because as a mediator, I'm neutral. I'm not representing either party, but both parties have a story. And the goal is to create a unifying story that they can then create from, as opposed to looking backwards at what happened, what was wrong. Okay, fine, that's your work. Let's create something new that can go forward. So I hope that's an explanation that and you can have your kid, like, let's say you're in a conflict with your child. It's almost like aspecting. Okay, honey, what would you do if you were me? That's almost a brand of parts work, having them learn to go into someone else's point of view to create that dialogue and problem solve, again, to create a new story going forward.
I like that. And I like what you said, creating a unifying story for the two of you, or for you and the child, if you're working with the child. I think that that's beautiful. Could you give, do you have like a concrete example of creating a unifying story and what that would look like to us?
Ooh, oh God. Um, sure. Because part of a divorce situation
Mhm.
is can sometimes be that one person has been unfaithful, right? And I always say it takes two to tango because if somebody is out there seeking intimacy from somebody else, there clearly is a breakdown in the relationship. But anyway, so one parent wants has the story of, I'm victimized, you left me, you've betrayed me. And the other person's story is, well, I'm totally justified in getting sex from somebody else because you've been withholding for the last 5 years. Okay. So that those are two different stories,
Mhm.
right? And so, first of all, I always make sure that they each of them gets to talk and 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 talk so that all of the pieces of the puzzle are on the table.
Mhm.
And then the example of the unifying story is, well, can we agree that there once was a nice degree of intimacy and you were satisfied at one point? Yeah, then they nod their head, right? And then can we agree that things happened that changed your ability and your frequency of interaction? Yes, we can agree on that. Do we have to point a finger at who did it and who didn't? Well, I want to point a finger. I want to point a finger. Yeah, but do we have to? Well, no, not really, because then they start to see that they each did have a part to play in the other person's story. So this is very important actually if there's children, because you don't want there to be the story that the kids get that makes one parent wrong and the other right.
Mhm.
So then the goal is to create a common, mom and dad have grown apart. We both love you very much, which is true, right? And then, what flows from that. But that's probably a classic example of two stories. You can meld them and then create a future focused story, especially for the children. Yes,
Mhm.
we aren't going to live together anymore, but we both still love you, that sort of thing. Is that a good example?
That is a great example too. And
Okay.
it's an example of, there's not pointing fingers going around or blaming each other. And then the children don't have to listen to or be a part of, that dynamic. They're hearing, we still love you,
Right.
and we're moving on because it's the right thing for us to do.
Which then creates a loving environment
Mhm.
because generally the other interesting thing that you hear constantly is my kids know. We haven't told them, but they know something's wrong. So the kids are living in an energetic field
Yeah.
of anxiety and fear because there's conflict between the parents. And usually once it's out and once they start talking about the future, the stress goes way down. It's actually kind of funny that people say, oh, we're getting along much better now that we're getting divorced. Yes, because before it was all in the background and stressful and unknown, and now you're actually getting a plan.
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
kids know. They sense it. I remember being young and knowing something was going on between my parents. And then eventually, when I was 25, they decided to go their separate ways, but totally knew that
yeah.
something was going on. And then being adult and looking back at their situation, like, of course, things happened the way they did. And not interesting choice of story, coming from you, Teri, because it was very reflective of my experience when I was younger and my parents were getting a divorce. Yeah, and of course,
Yeah.
right? That's your psychic Billy coming in, Teri.
Wow.
I love it when that happens during my conversations with my guests. Teri, I can't believe it. We've already, we're at the top of the hour already. It's been such a pleasure to have you and have this conversation. I love all of the little tidbits of information that were brought up. And if people want to learn more about this topic or work with you, Teri, how can they find you?
Probably the best place, my current website is called tbkulat.com, tbkulat, because nobody can ever pronounce or spell Baron, and I'm either Teresa or Teri, so that's how I came up with that. And that'll link you to everywhere else. The law firm is in Chicago, and that's where I mediate also. But really, TB Kulat is the best place to reach me. And I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook, and LinkedIn because I'm very much in that realm too.
Great. Perfect. Teri, thank you so much. And my last question, what is a jewel of wisdom that you would love to leave our listeners with today?
Ooh, it's funny. I was the most important question that one should ask is, what do I want? What do I really want? And so often we don't allow ourselves to want what we want. And that's one of the things I've learned, especially through now becoming more body based and embodied, that the body knows. And so when you ask yourself, what do I want? Listen to all of the parts of you and make sure they're all aligned before you take a step or try to get more clear. And that's probably the most important thing.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that little tidbit of wisdom with us, Teri. It's been such a pleasure to host you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great
So
to see you
great.
too, Liz.
And everybody be sure to reach out and check out Teri. And remember, she doesn't only do mediation, but she also works with couples who are not going through a divorce. So if you need a little extra TLC, go ahead and find Teri at tbkulat.com. And thank you everyone for joining me. Of course, I am Liz Peterson. This is Raise the Vibe with Liz. You can find me at raisethevibewithliz.com and on social media at Raise the Vibe with Liz. Thanks, everybody. And remember to get out there and raise the vibe. Have a great day, everybody. Bye now. Bye, Teri.